whenever I tell people about it, they say, well, that sounds really dull. So, don't worry about it. And they say, no, come on, seriously, what do you work for? And I say, well, it's called accounting today. I know everyone thinks it's boring and it's dull, but it's called accounting today. And he goes, oh, all right, well, that's fine. And his face kind of changes. And I'm like, that's weird. Why is his face kind of changing? And I said, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm Steve's accountant. So I mentioned Steve's the guy who was getting married. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I need to figure out how I'm going to introduce myself to people from now on.
I'm Brannon Poe, and this is the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast, where you can enjoy engaging conversations about mergers and acquisitions and accounting practice management. Listen in on strategies to build a more fun and valuable accounting firm. Welcome to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. I'm excited today. I've got a guest on today that many of you might be very familiar with or very familiar with his publication. I have Daniel Hood on. He's the editor-in-chief at Accounting Today. And if you have been under a rock and aren't familiar with Accounting Today, it's the leading information resource for public accountants, reaching over 325,000 professionals across the full breadth of the profession, ranging from sole practitioners who prepare tax returns up to the big four firms that audit the largest multinational corporations. He's been with Accounting Today for over 2 decades, previously serving as managing editor. He's also served as a business editor for the New York Daily News Express and a production editor for the Wall Street Journal Europe. I didn't know about the Wall Street Journal. That's really exciting.
It was cool.
I bet it was. So welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So first question I always ask my guests is like, okay, how did you get into your field? How did you find yourself one day at Accounting Today as editor-in-chief?
Entirely by accident. I got out of school and somebody got me a job at a company as basically I was a receptionist, and then they needed someone to help with they produced magazines and newspapers. They needed help laying out the magazines and newspapers. I started working on that, and then went from there to sort of be a production and design person, layout and that sort of thing. And then at some point in the 90s, layout and design and edit came together through the magic of desktop publishing. And so they were like, well, you know how to lay out magazine pages and lay out newspaper pages, and you know how to spell. So we're going to make you an editor. So that's how I ended up. There's a couple of steps I went to. I was working at the Wall Street Journal for a while, worked at the Daily News, but that's how I ended up at Accounting Today as managing editor, because that was one of the managing editor's jobs, was to lay out the magazine and then make sure everything was spelled and in English and that sort of thing. And then I was that for a long time. And then at some point, that period where layout and design and editing were combined ended, and they sort of ended up getting split up again. And I sort of found myself on the editorial side after that, because I learned a lot about accounting and the pay was better. So I said, I'll stick with the editorial staff.
So when you started, I guess the technology in your industry was probably a lot different when you started. Were you kind of like doing layouts with I've talked to people who were in advertising many, many years ago, and they'd actually like cut things and like physically cut things and
paste it up with wax. Yeah, they have all these guys with razor blades. I was the guy who took all their jobs away. I was when I came on, because they were like, well, you know how to, that was the thing. They were like, we need someone to do this layout. No one knows how to do it, because the only people who know how to do it are, all teens, because it was all computer based. And they're like, you know how to use a computer? I'm like, sure, I could use a computer. I know how to use a mouse. That was basically my qualification.
Yeah.
But like I said, all the guys I was putting out of business were the old guys who were geniuses. They could do amazing things with razor blades and X-Acto knives and a little piece. They could put the dot of an eye and remove it and place it with replace it with some other character if you wanted to put a heart. They could do these amazing things, but they were really expensive, and the computers would do it much cheaper, particularly with idiots like me behind the wheel.
Yeah, well, this is a good segue into what we talked about kind of before we hit the record button today, was AI. And I just came from a workshop with the Entrepreneurs Organization about AI. You just came from a AICPA workshop.
Yep.
And I'll start this and tee it up for you. So one thing that was shocking to me was sort of like big picture on things that are happening in the industry for AI. Not in the accounting industry, but just in general, the amount of data centers coming online, the amount of computing power that is being kind of prepared, that the
Right.
investment going into computing power, the investment going into energy, the people that are kind of controlling this industry right now, the AI industry, are putting massive amounts of capital into it, and their vision for this is very large.
Yeah.
And their predictions, maybe the predictions that I heard are a little more, shall we say, optimistic than could end up being. I feel like when the internet came out, everyone was talking about how fast it was going to be and how easy it was going to be, and then 20 years later, that vision was realized. I personally think AI will
Yeah.
be a little faster than that. But what I came away with was like a little bit of fear of the amount of disruption that's going to happen in the next
Yeah.
5 years. But on the other side of that coin, on the other side of the fear coin is excitement, right? Because there's tons of opportunity. There's tons of ways that this can help so many different companies, but we're still in the wild, wild west of AI. So I know you had like some pretty interesting, maybe some more industry specific takeaways
Yeah.
about AI, which I'd love to get into.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I'd say, I'm glad to hear where the two things we went to are sort of matching up on some fronts. When you talk about preparing and investing and starting, and it's the wild, wild west. That was the impression I really came away with. This is so early days for AI. You talk about it takes 20 years to figure out what we're going to do with the internet, and it took 30 years to figure out what radio was going to be. You're probably right. I think that AI will move a little bit faster, but it's still going to be very different from what we're seeing now. People talked about how we're moving from sort of ChatGPT style generative AI to agentic AI. That's the next big step. But everybody at the symposium I was at pretty much agreed that after agentic AI, there'll be something else, and then there'll be something else, and then there'll be something else, some other form of AI, some other iteration of AI that's going to look very different from generative AI and from agentic AI. And as you say, we're moving through all these stages to get to some final form of AI, but that's a good ways away. And I don't think anybody knows what it looks like. It's one of those things where it is. It may not be far away in time. Like I said, I think your point there is probably right. They'll move faster, but they are far away in sort of structure and concept and what it means. And I think it's going to be both exciting and terrifying to see what that structure is. And I think that's the problem is at every level, right? At the broad level, and then taking it down to sort of the accounting, the level of the profession, no one knows what this is going to look like for the world at large and for accounting in particular. There is tremendous opportunity, right? Pretty much a consensus at the place I was that you needn't necessarily lose out if you try to keep up with AI, right? If you work with AI, you have a much better chance of surviving it than if you don't. The people who are going to win are not somebody who isn't an accountant, and it's not AI. It's going to be the accountant who uses AI. That's going
Yeah.
to be the winner.
Yeah.
So that's and whether that's true or not, because I can kind of look at it and say I don't know how you feel about it, but every once in a while in the sort of dark, at the dark moments, in the middle of the night, I say, you know what, AI could totally replace us, and not just accountants. Could replace reporters and editors and writers. It could replace all kinds of theoretically. When you look at the potential, it could just replace all of us. And
Yeah.
we'd all be without jobs. I don't like to think that way. When the sun comes up, then I go, it's probably not as bad as that. But it's definitely we are all going to have to engage with it. And then you talked about investments at the highest levels, at the sort of industry wide levels. The Amazons and the Microsofts and the OpenAIs and so on. We're definitely seeing accounting firms and accounting software vendors and developers putting lots of money into it as well. And obviously not on the scale that is being spent somewhere in the broader economy, but still putting in lots of money, particularly at the larger firms. They're investing a lot. You hear the billion-dollar investments by the big four. I don't think we're seeing that in any of the other size firms, but still lots of money people going into it, particularly around preparing for the data analysis and the data support and the data management stuff that all has to go into it. That was one thing that continues to surprise me as sort of a minor takeaway, but really important is how important your data is and how important the cleanliness and quality of your data. They'll all brag about how our ChatGPT or our generative AI can look at all kinds of unstructured data, and that's true. But you get much, much better results if your data is somewhat clean and somewhat structured, and has been looked at. There's a firm there, Shellman they're a top 100 firm out of Florida, does a lot of audit work and has a lot of AI built into what they're doing. And they like to have a full-time person whose job it is to sort of check their data and keep it clean and keep it structured. And that goes again to the sort of how early stages we are, right? That we aren't even ready to actually use a lot of our data in an AI capacity because it's a mess and we need to clean it up. And it's all that stuff needs to be worked on before we can really even begin to get a clear outline of what this can do and what it'll mean.
Yeah. And my takeaway too coming out of this workshop was, hey, there's two things you can do right now, and that is getting your data clean, getting that foundation. That's the foundation of getting AI to work in your company, right? Is your own data, and starting to, capture more data, because you can use this stuff to train your team. You can use this stuff to onboard new people. There's all sorts of different uses for it, but you got to have that data. And the other thing that I came away with was, if you can just start small, looking at different applications, just get started with something. Hopefully it's got a quick ROI. Like, okay, how could this really help me? And just learning that and looking at different applications. So, it's exciting. I'm sure it's going to affect the industry in time, but like you said, I don't think we know what it's going to do, what the impact is going to be and how fast it's going to.
It's going to be weird. Someone just to reinforce what you were saying, someone that literally said, well, why would you start with something big? People are like, oh, I'm going to bring AI and have it take care of all my tax work. Like, well, why would you start with something big like that? If it goes wrong, your business is destroyed. Start with something small. And a lot of it was around learning, right? And that's one of the biggest things you can do right now is get your data in order, as you say, but also start to learn what AI means, how it works, how it does what it do. You don't need to be able to, what's the thing? You don't need to build the watch. You just need to know how to tell time. But right now, none of us really know how to tell time. And that's, start looking at that, start thinking about what's a prompt, what's prompt engineering, what does that look like? How do I interact with AI? Thinking about data, we've been talking a lot about data. I started to think, what is data, right? Our idea of data, I think for most of us, is numbers and spreadsheets, right? But there's all kinds of other data out there, right? And particularly unstructured data. And people are already starting to use AI for that. They'll throw in a bunch of leases, right? For lease accounting and say, digest this and look and find, I need to look for these kinds of phrases in leases so that I'll know, how it might help me learn how to qualify them, or where to put them on the books and that sort of thing. There's, the definition of data is going to expand and change in how we think about it. And just to start wrapping your head around the concepts that are going with it and what it can and can't do and might do in the future. It's probably a great way to start as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an exciting topic. I'm sure it's going to change rapidly. I think the things that are you're going to look at this year, again, another reason not to do something big, because the effort required to do something, if you don't have a pretty quick return on whatever AI tools you're going to try to adopt, if you just wait another year, those tools will be easier to use. They'll be better. The quality is going to improve quickly. So that was the other thing, is like, if you don't see an immediate ROI, a use for it, then you probably shouldn't do it, because there's the effort.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that's right, is you think about these things. It's at the early stage, when you think about the early days of computing, when people had to build their own computers, right? Mac started with, they would sell a motherboard. You had to figure out what to do with it, but it was still, that was how you got a computer. That's, I think, for a lot of people, that's where we are with AI. You don't need to do it. Someone's going to build those tools into tools you can buy off the shelf that'll be pretty much more easy to use than AI itself is now. So unless you've got a compelling case, as you say, if you're looking at going, I don't really know what this is going to do for me, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I shouldn't say don't worry about it. Like we said, you'll learn about it, figure it, help wrap your head around it. But do you necessarily need to apply it into your firm right now? Maybe not, because there's a lot of accounting solutions vendors out there figuring out how to build it into their tools and figuring out how to make it easier for you to use, right? So you don't have to be an AI genius. You can just wait a year and your software will do it for you. Now, you may then have to learn how your software, how best to get good results out of your software and so on. But it'll become easier for everybody if you wait a little bit and approach it from a more educated sort of standpoint.
If you own a CPA practice, you're no stranger to the grind. It's easy to get so buried in work that you lose sight of the bigger picture. Oftentimes, in order to improve, we need to change our point of view. Accounting Practice Academy by Poe Group Advisors gives you that fresh perspective, so you can achieve success on your terms. This virtual workshop gives you the tools and mindsets to grow your bottom line and make your firm less owner dependent. You'll use your firm's data to zoom out and see your challenges and opportunities with amazing clarity. Most APA members come to realize that pruning their clients and doing less will actually generate more income. Poe Group Advisors has sold hundreds of accounting practices. We know that the firms that are the easiest to operate are also the most valuable ones in the marketplace. APA is the only workshop built from that mergers and acquisitions perspective, which means our members build more valuable practices. Create a better practice for you and your employees to enjoy, or build it to sell. The choice is yours.
Well, let's talk a little bit about scaling. A lot of our audience is interested in how to grow an accounting firm, and a lot of our listeners might have smaller firms like $1 to $10 million in annual revenue. And again, before we hit the record button today, we kind of chatted a little bit about growth and how what got you here won't get you there, I guess is how I would paraphrase that.
Absolutely.
So I would love to get your thoughts on what are the challenges of scaling a small firm, and what do firm owners need to be thinking about if they want to grow a bigger business?
Right. It's amazing. I always think of it, there comes a time in a young firm's life. There's very much that period somewhere between 1 and 10 million, going anywhere up to, and it depends who you talk to and what the firm is like, but anywhere from that 1 to 10 million all the way up to, even to 30 or 40 million, when people are, figuring out how to negotiate. That's a weird period of time for accounting firms, because you're going from, you had been pretty much one, maybe two people, maybe you have a couple of employees, but it's really just one or two partners. You kind of, everything is very loosey-goosey, and you can grow your firm to the bottom threshold of that without really much in the way of being business, right? Being a sort of formal business. You can handle things in an ad hoc kind of way. You can handle your technology on the weekend, and your hiring is pretty simple, and maybe even get, you get somebody to help you with it. Maybe you have a part-time bookkeeper or a part-time invoice person, but really it's a pretty straightforward, simple, stripped down operation, because there's not that much in the way of corporate requirements for you. And I don't mean requirements in a sort of compliance sense, but just you need somebody to handle this. As you get bigger, though, and this is, you talk about the what got you here won't get you to the next stage. Scaling from that point is not just, hey, doing more of what I'm doing now, right? If I'm doing 100 tax returns now and I got 100 clients, all I need to do is get 1,000 clients and 1,000 tax returns, and I'll make 10 times as much money. And it just doesn't work that way at all, right? As you get to that 1,000 clients, you add on all sorts of structural requirements you just have to have in place to be able to handle it. And it's things like, what kind of HR function do you have? Doesn't mean you have to have a full-time HR person, but it means you got to have somebody looking after that, because you cannot handle at that scale, you personally, or you and your partner or your couple of partners, you can't handle it. There's just too much going on there, and it's too important to not have it be handled in some kind of professional way. The same thing goes for your technology. The bigger you get, the more clients you're bringing on, the more data you have, the more back and forths that you're having, and the different kinds of back and forths that you're having. That's a terrible way of putting it, back and forth, but you know what I mean? Data exchange, different kinds of data coming in from a lot of different places, how you're making sure that you're keeping track of it, how you're making sure that it's backed up and it's safe, and so on. Those become not just bigger, but different, very, very different. So you need someone with some serious tech expertise. Your marketing goes from just being, hey, I talked to somebody, or some of our clients referred some stuff to me, to a business development function, right? And you need to have some support there. Again, it doesn't always mean that you have to go out and hire someone, and there's no threshold where you say, okay, you were making 2 million, and now you're making 2.1 million. That means you've got to have these 4 people hired onto your staff, but it means you need to start thinking about those functions in a much more corporate kind of way than you would when you were smaller. And again, it's a process. You're going to go through a thing where maybe you're hiring some part-time help for this, and then maybe you're having a full-time, and they won't always. Every firm will look different as it grows and expands. Different needs will pop up depending on the nature of your business and the nature of your clients and the size of your staff. But you need to be aware that you're going to have to stop doing that and start having a professional backbone to your firm, a sort of professional back office that handles a lot of these things. We just completed our top 100 firms survey, and one of the sort of data points, and I realized that's right, that's much bigger than we're talking about. But there's a data point in there that I only discovered 2 years ago that continues to fascinate me. And it's the number of employees per partner at the billion-dollar firms is twice as high as the number of employees per partner at all the firms that are smaller than them. And it's something like the average big four, actually billion-dollar firm, I should say, there's about $17 billion firms at this point. The average number of employees per partner is about 15 or 16 at those firms, and it's 7 to 8 at smaller firms. And these are still, we're talking, $800, $900 million firms, but that's a big leverage point. And the reason that those firms are able to leverage that is because they have that corporate infrastructure. One of the reasons, there's a couple of others, but that's a big one, right? They have a huge HR department. They have a huge legal and education department, learning and education department. They have a huge business development staff. They have all kinds of support stuff that allow this larger staff to function effectively as a company, as a corporate thing. And I don't mean to differentiate it from firm in a negative way. It's just that's a corporate way of acting and behaving that allows you to do a lot more. And not that everybody needs to have the infrastructure that a big four firm has, but you need to start thinking about that kind of stuff as you start to move up from that 1, 2, 3 million size and start thinking about how much bigger do I want to get? And as I become bigger, I'm going to need to start thinking about a lot of these things. Sorry, I've been rambling on for a long time.
No, it's good. You got me thinking about, I saw a speaker just talking about bigger business in general. It wasn't accounting specific, but the revenue per person as firms grow, as businesses grow, it's actually a lot higher. So you would think with all those people and sort of a bureaucracy, if you will, that your revenue per person might not be as strong, but it actually gets, the revenue per person goes up as the size of the company goes up as well, even with all of that structure.
Yeah. It's weird, right? It's totally counterintuitive. You would expect, well, wait, all these people are, they're sucking revenue out of my pockets. And for a lot, and this is a big thing for a lot, particularly for, smaller firms, very small firms, 1, 2, 3 partners, it's going to feel that way. I mean, there's no question it is coming out of your pocket. But what it's going to do is free you up to make so much more money. As you go on, you think of small things like grant writer, proposal writers, right? The big four firms, I'm sure, have departments full of proposal writers, right? When clients come out, that allows them to go after much, much, much bigger clients. Again, I'm not suggesting small firms need to be like big firms, but it points out how that works, right? Having that kind of back office structure to it, whatever it is, opens you up to much bigger opportunities, much bigger clients, a much greater scale and capacity, right? If you've got a team, a small team dedicated to handling your outsourcing, you can outsource a lot more work, which means you can take on a lot more work. If you're a small firm, you're managing that outsourcing relationship, and it's a relationship. There's no question. It's a thing you've got to keep on top of. You can get a lot of value out of it, but it takes time and effort, and it takes time and effort away from the work. I think particularly that a lot of, at smaller firms, why do you do this work? You do it because you like it. You do it because you like working with clients, and you like doing tax returns, and you like the books, and you like the being inside the business, and that's fun and rewarding and brings good value to clients. But if you want to get bigger, that's the problem. Is you have to start doing a lot of the work that nobody really wants to do, which is managing and structuring and holding people accountable and thinking more broadly and not doing the stuff that got you into accounting in the first place, right? The things that made sense and how the books all spoke to you and came together. You're going to do a lot less of that. Which sounds terrible, I realize, but it means you're serving more clients better. It means you're providing more opportunities to your staff. It means you're offering more value out into the world, but it does require that big change.
Yeah, I interviewed a CPA named Rob Siegfried. I don't know if you know Rob,
Sure.
but he grew a firm from scratch to over $100 million, and we wrote a paper on this. And he described growing as a series of letting go. I think so many people think growing is like more and more and more. Like in your example, hey, if I do 10x the kind of work, but as the leader of a firm like that, it's actually about doing less and less and less. And yeah, he got to zero billable hours pretty early and that was his goal. And managing partners of much larger firms thought he was a little crazy for wanting to get to zero billable hours, but that's what he did, and that allowed him to grow. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, no, but it's hard letting that stuff go.
Yeah,
In part because a lot of your partners will be looking at you going, "You have zero billable hours. What are
yeah,
you doing?"
yeah, yeah,
Um, because I realize, right? Then it's worth it. It's one of those things where it's the language doesn't help it, right? Because we go, you're the managing partner, and I think that's why you see at a lot of firms they're switching that name. They're switching, just calling him a CEO. You're a CEO. I'm
yeah,
sorry, my phone
yeah.
keeps binging at me. I'm going to turn it off on silent. I thought I had turned it on silent, but apparently I had. Um, but yeah, you need to think of them as a CEO. And
Right.
not so much as a managing partner, where that's, oh, you're just a partner who also happens to do a little managing on the side to keep things smooth. You really have to think about yourself as the head of a business, and that means, as you say, letting go of a lot of the stuff that really uh, you started out for doing. That was the value you brought, was that you did this work really well. But if you want to take it to the next level, you have to do a different kind of work very well.
Yeah. You mentioned the top 100 firm survey. Any other big big ahas from that survey you want to share?
CAS keeps growing, keeps being a big deal for everybody. We always ask sort of a breakdown of fee split by, it's usually audit and tax and advisory work, and then other. We added CAS as a separate category this year. It is still pretty small, but it's going to be. We're expecting it to grow. A lot of the firms in their sort of ad lib responses were focusing very seriously on CAS, also focusing very seriously on advisory work. They think that's going to be crucial. Their clients are asking for it, and I think the impact of private equity in a bunch of different ways in terms of competition. Right, I think we're seeing lots of firms. That haven't taken on PE money talking about how it's changing their competitive landscape and changing it fairly frequently, like changing it this month and then changing it again next month and then changing it month after that, as firms are cycling through owners and firms are reaching out across big geographies and multiple geographies. They're seeing a lot of competition there, but we're also seeing more and more different models for accounting firms. And I think that's something, this year is just a continuation of a trend that's been going on for 3 or 4 years of finding all kinds of different ways you can be an accounting firm. It doesn't have to just be a straightforward partnership. That was pretty much the model for 80 odd years. But just in
Yes.
the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen all these firms taking on, now they're ESOPs and now they're PE firms and now they're owned by a PE firm, or they're on a PE firm platform and they're still operating kind of independently, but they're definitely owned by their central PE firm. And I think we're going to see a handful more of different models of that coming out in the next couple of years, just from the people we talk to who are interested in coming into the accounting profession. What that's going to mean for, it's going to mean two things. One, obviously, like I said, just structurally, there's going to be a lot of different ways to be an accounting firm. You won't be a CPA firm. You'll be an alternative practice structure with a CPA firm and an advisory firm, or you may be something else entirely. The other thing is that there's, what does PE mean in and of itself? What does non-CPA ownership mean? Even if it's just all the people, if it's an ESOP where it's employee ownership, what does that mean? How will that change what accounting firms do and how they think of themselves, their role with the public, for instance? How does that change? What is their, right now, I think it's safe to say, right, that accounting firms they're the most trusted advisor, tremendous professional integrity, tremendous professional responsibility to their clients. Is that at risk? Will that change when firms come in? None of this, I should say, we're not seeing this. We're not seeing, firms give up their professional responsibilities or anything like that. But it raises a bunch of serious questions along those lines here. What are the things that keep that professional responsibility and integrity intact? Is there anything special about the CPA firm partnership model that does that? Because we're going to see a lot of new, different models come up, beyond just the two or three we've already seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think the partnership model, the biggest thing I see as a issue or as an obstacle with it is it's very hard to change and grow with that partnership model because you always got this one or two partners that's kind of your, I call them the veto people. They don't want to change and they want everything to kind of be the same. And we're operating in an environment where not changing is pretty dangerous, I think.
Right. There's a great, I want to say it's Alan Colton, but it may not be. So it said, you got a group of partners and no one can say yes, but everyone can say no.
Yeah.
And and even if they don't want to say no, they can say, well, let's think about it. And as you say, if you're not moving fast, right, that's a dangerous thing to do. You may not need to change, right, but you need to respond to whatever it is. You may need to think very clearly. Yes, we need to change, or in some cases you may say no, but you need to do it quickly and with some certainty. And that's we're talking about scaling, right? That's another issue with the bigger your partner group goes. It feels like you're getting big because you've got a lot of partners. But you're going to be held back from that next level because the next level is where some of those partners have to let go of the notion that they control the firm.
Right.
In the end, obviously they get a vote when a vote matters over big things, but on a daily basis, one of the things that you have to change as you grow is some partners have more control over partners than others. You've got to have a leadership team, and the leadership team has to be able to say to some people, you got to be different. You got to do this differently. You got to work on this instead of that, or you got to deal with your clients differently than when you've been doing it. And that's a big issue. I think that we didn't really talk about when we talk about scaling, but it's a big issue.
Yeah, because that veto power is really strong. If people have veto power, boy, you can really stall out and sort of growing. Scaling becomes very, very difficult if you've got an anchor attached to you.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. And it is. That's the thing. It really is. It's an anchor, and I think for to give the veto people, they're kind of a lot of times they're not thinking of it that way. They're not like, I want to stop everything. They're just like, do we need to do this? They're cautious, and then this is they're cautious and small c conservative, right? They're like, well, no, let's not do anything crazy. We're an accounting firm. We're supposed to be cautious and careful and think things through and take our time. The problem is that time is a precious commodity these days, and things move so quickly that you can take your time, but you have to take your time very quickly.
Yes. So time, I want to respect your time, and we're going to wrap up. I got a couple of wrap-up questions. One is stories. Do you have a funny career story that you could share?
I tell this story, and whenever I tell it to accountants, I'm not sure how they take it. So I had to very carefully lay the groundwork. When I very first started working for Accounting Today as managing editor, would tell people, I'm going to be managing editor for Accounting Today, and people who weren't accountants, because most of the people I knew weren't accountants at that point, were like, oh, accounting. That sounds pretty dull. I'm like, so far it's not bad. It's fine. But I quickly learned that if I said I work at Accounting Today to people, they would go, oh, that's pretty dull, which was rude of them. But what are you going to do? And early on we had an artist who did our cover art. Over the course of a year, I got to know him very well. We became good friends on the phone. We never met because he lived outside the city. He got married at the end of the first year, and said, why don't you come up for my wedding? We can meet at the wedding. I get there, and he knows a ton of people. Because there's hundreds of people there, and I don't know anybody. So I'm just sort of, moseying around, get on the receiving line. And it's a very long receiving line because he knows a lot of people. So people end up chatting, and I'm talking to the guy next to me. He says, so what do you do? And I said, well, I'm managing editor of a trade magazine. And he goes, oh, really? What trade magazine? And I go, well, yeah, it's a small trade. No, you wouldn't have heard of it. Most people would find it very dull. I said, oh, go ahead, just tell me what trade is it? Man, whenever I tell people about it, they say, well, that sounds really dull. So, don't worry about it. And he said, no, come on, seriously, what do you work for? And I say, well, it's called Accounting Today. I know everyone thinks it's boring and it's dull, but it's called Accounting Today. And he goes, oh, all right, well, that's fine. And his face kind of changes. And I'm like, that's weird. Why is his face kind of changing? And I said, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm Steve's accountant. So Steve was, I mentioned, Steve's the guy who was getting married. So at that point, I was like, I need to figure out how I'm going to introduce myself to people from now on. And I reached the point now, I can tell that story because what I've discovered, right, is that I work at a company that has a lot of different trade magazines, and of all of them, the one I would most want to work with is Accounting Today, because accountants are super passionate about what they do, and that's even if you find the subject matter boring. I had no knowledge of accounting, didn't know anything about accounting, still really don't know a lot about actual technical accounting, but when people are passionate about what they do, that's fun to cover, right? It's just their infection sort of comes across, their infectious enthusiasm sort of comes across. We work for a lot of the other publications here. People talk about, it's like pulling teeth to get people to talk about their professions, but for accountants, they love it and they want to share.
Yeah, you know, I never really thought about it because I've been in it for so long. But you're right, we are passionate about our profession. It's true, and interesting that, yeah, that's a really good point. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right,
It's
one
great.
last question. Book. Can you recommend a book for our audience?
Sure. This is not. I read this. Actually, read this a couple of years ago, but this is the book I recommended to everybody from a long time. It's nonfiction. It's not about accounting. It's called Say Nothing, and it's about a sort of case study of a woman in the Troubles in Ireland in the early 1970s who was murdered, and her murder was unusual in that it was she was never found. Her body was never found, apparently. And this the book tells you this. Apparently, most times when somebody was murdered, whether they were, whichever side they were on, they let you know because they wanted you to know. They were mostly warnings, right? So you'd leave the body in the middle of the street so that all your enemies would know you were out for them. But she disappeared and no one ever knew where she went. And this journalist sort of goes treating this story as sort of a microcosm of one part of the Troubles. And so he brings in all these other details about that, which are pretty fascinating. But he's also following this story about this woman and where is she and what happened to her, and where's her body, and how did she die and who killed her. And basically, in the course of investigating this story, which he tells really, really well, and it's exciting, it moves pretty quickly, and it's like a murder mystery, only it's true. He gives you this picture of the Troubles in Ireland, which is fascinating. It's a weird and fascinating period of time. But he also, just in the process of reporting it, investigating it, he may have solved it. And so at the end, he sort of starts revealing these details that he's learned that pretty much say, I'm not bringing anybody to court. I'm not arresting anybody for anything. But some of the stuff I've put together pretty clearly means this person did it. And you're all the back jacket cover copy and the advertising around it said, "Ooh, he may have solved it," and you're like, "Yeah, did he really solve it?" And then when you get to his evidence, you're like, "Oh no, he did solve it. He totally solved it. It may not be, like I said, court ready evidence that you can have somebody arrested on, but he pretty clearly solved this mystery, and we now know how this woman died and why." And you're like, and it's right at the very end. You get to this point thinking, "Oh well, that was just a a hook to bring you in," and then you get to it, and you're like, "Oh my." Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Just the last 10 pages. All the rest of it is good. It's a good read. It moves at a good pace. It's fascinating stuff. It's murders and terrorism and whichever side you're on. He's very good about not being Protestant or Catholic or taking sides or anything like that. And he's very careful to make that clear. So you don't come through feeling like, wow, he has a bone to pick. You just come through he figured it out. And I think they've actually made it a mini series now on one of the streaming channels. But the book itself was fantastic.
So was the case never solved officially?
It was never solved in part because her body just disappeared. So at first it was just a disappearance. And when somebody disappeared back then, you were like, well, their body will probably turn up. And it didn't. They did eventually find her body. And I can't remember. I'm assuming they found it. She had been killed. It was a murder. They knew it. But it was so in the past, and there was no real evidence to tie anybody to it. Wow. And no one had claimed it. And that was what was so weird. Like I said, was that whenever somebody got murdered in Northern Ireland at that period of time, somebody claimed it. Somebody said, "Oh yeah, we did it. We did it because he was a bad guy, or we did it because he was a Catholic, or we did it because he was a Protestant, or they were every murder got claimed." And this one just didn't. So it sort of slipped between the cracks. And it's a weird, she was a mother of I want to say 11 kids, can't have been 11 kids, but she had a lot of kids. And so all her kids were sort of, fell into the system and stuff like that. It's a really good, creepy story with this. You come away thinking, wow, this is this poor woman and her poor family. But also, poor Ireland and poor everybody for having to go through this. But then he solves it at the end.
Yeah, that's great. Great.
Yeah, no, it's a very good, also, like I said, I didn't know a lot about that period, and it does a good job of without taking sides or diving into, it's not a history.
Sounds interesting. Well, Dan, this has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you for joining our podcast today. And what's the best way for people to connect with you or follow you online?
I think you just go accountingtoday.com. My email's on there. If anybody wants to reach out to me, always feel free to do that. Or I'm on LinkedIn. All the contact information is on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. You can keep the momentum going by subscribing and sharing your thoughts with us. Visit our website at pogroupadvisors.com for more resources, and tune in next time for more exciting conversations like this one.